Hello, I'm Andrew, and this is my first lab report. So the purpose of this lab was to learn about the transfer of charges using pieces of tape and charging them, and then seeing their interaction. We will then calculate approximately how much charge was transferred to or from the tape, and, along with some other calculations. And so some main models or physical principles are Coulomb's law, which allows us to calculate the electric force relating to the two charges and their distance, and then the relation of force and electric field, the conservation of charge, so then no charges can be gained or lost uh, in a closed system, and then opposite charges attract and same charges repel, which is a pretty important concept shown here because the first part of the experiment was charging a piece of tape and putting my hand next to it, as shown in the top diagram, and it ended up being attracted to my hand. So that means that my hand and the tape had opposite charges, and I found that the charge of from the charge of each piece of tape through the second experiment uh, by having them one held under the other, and the charge of each piece of tape was approximately 1.13 times 10 to the negative 8 coulombs. And then after that, I also calculated that each piece of tape lost approximately 7.09 times 10 to the 10th electrons, and also that each piece of tape had approximately 2.67 times 10 to the 17th atoms. And so I calculated the ratio of how many electrons each atom approximately lost. And so the model was treat each of the pieces of tape as point charges to simplify the calculations of forces and charges, along with some other assumptions such as ignoring air resistance, uh, treating each piece of tape as having the same charge, and having the tape's mass as 1 gram per meter. These are all pretty significant assumptions that affected my calculations for sure. The system was the upper piece of tape, and the surroundings were the lower piece of tape and everything else. For the first part of the experiment, as I said earlier, the tape got attracted to my hand. I charged the tape by peeling it quickly off another piece of tape on the table. And for the second part of the experiment, I charged two pieces of tape the same way, and I held the lower piece of tape under the upper piece of tape, and I measured the distance between pieces of tape when the upper piece of tape first started moving, first started repelling from the other piece of tape. And so these were the initial measurements. I calculate that the gravitational force was the mass of the tape multiplied by the gravitational constant, and then I also assumed that the electric force is equal to gravitational force because there are no net external forces, so it's only gravitational and electric force. And in my glow script model, I have the 2 point charges, which I assumed are point charges. The one on the top was the upper tape, and that one has the gravitational force and electric force, so the gravitational force pointing down and electric force pointing up. And I calculated the various things I mentioned earlier, such as the force of electricity, the charge of each piece of tape, how many electrons the tape lost, how many atoms they had, and how many electrons each atom lost. And so some sources of error is it was a very crude measurement of the tape length and width using a ruler, and so that could definitely affect a lot of things. And then the assumption of the mass of the tape, I used the provided number ratio of length to grams, but that could definitely differ because the width of the tape could be different. And also the assumptions that the tape has the same charge is a significant source of error because then that could have led to a different force, electric force, and that would have changed everything. And the difference between data and model prediction. So the model takes into account the distance between tapes, which would also factor in other things, such as like tension or air resistance, anything like that. While on the other hand, my data prediction at the start just equated the gravity to the electric force, which was a very simple equation that just ignored everything else. And so what if the electrons had positive charge and protons had negative charge? So nothing would change. The observations would be the same because same charges repel each other. And then why is it important to handle the charged tapes as little as possible? And what if they come in contact with your hands or other objects? So is to prevent charge from escaping or entering the tape. That would mess with the calculations a lot. So if it were to touch my hand, for example, then electrons would go from our hand to the tape because the tape is lacking electrons. Thank you.